Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in.
So yeah, after about 2 years of not playing World of Warcraft, I've been pulled back in. What can I say? All that positive buzz around the release, players giving glowing impressions, and, a tiny bit of peer pressure. It's a powerful concoction. And then there was that Preach video, where he went to Blizzard headquarters and did a bunch of interviews. And the impression was that Blizzard really wanted to do right this time. They seemed very humble, and like they really did want to change. I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV for the past 2 years, and when you look at Final Fantasy XIV and the history of that game, 1.0 was an unmitigated disaster, far worse than World of Warcraft has ever been. But they were able to right the ship, and eventually turned it into a really awesome game, so I don't see any reason why Blizzard couldn't do the same. So, was Blizzard able to do that? Is Dragonflight what we've been waiting for? Well, I've been playing Dragonflight since its launch, and I think that's been more than enough time to put out some thoughts of the expansion so far. Just keep in mind that anything can change. MMOs are an ever-evolving thing, and that can be for better or for worse. So let's take a look at Dragonflight, starting with the leveling. So, even in the most universally disliked expansions, the leveling was always really good. That dopamine hit as you gain levels, more power, new abilities, better gear, it's really addictive. And while I feel like it's always been really good, Dragonflight is on a whole new level. It's one of the best leveling experiences that I've had in World of Warcraft in years. And I think there are 2 big reasons why. The first is dragon gliding, and the second is the revamped talent system. So, dragon gliding is an insanely fun system that has tight, arcadey controls, and allows the player to reach insane speeds if they can master the mechanics. And that is an important aspect of dragon gliding. It's skill-based, and you need to pay attention and do the mechanics correctly. And I really love that your skill is rewarded in that way. And as you start getting better at the mechanics, you can find yourself zipping across the zones in no time at all. You will also get access to this within 30 minutes of arriving on the Dragon Islands. You don't have to get to level cap first or go through some tedious quest line to get it. Also, the zones were designed with gliding in mind. I feel like it's been a really long time since Blizzard designed zones to take advantage of being able to fly around. So there are dragon glyphs that you can go out and find, and these are used to train your dragon and gain new talents which allow you to glide longer and go faster. Some of them are right in your face, while others may require a little bit more finesse as you try to figure out how to scale a really tall mountain. There are also flags that you can find, which are usually on top of really tall structures, and finding them rewards you with a cutscene showing off a vista, and also rewards you with reputation. There are also the dragon gliding challenges, and not only are these fun, but there's also a quest in every single zone that rewards you with experience points for doing them all. And the zones are designed in such a way that you will come across them just by progressing through the story, so it's not even like you have to go out of your way to do them. Finally, questing is made a lot smoother when you were able to zip around from quest to quest. A big part of leveling is exploring and getting around the zones. And with gliding, this is just made so much more fun. The second thing was the revamped talent system, which now allows you to choose a new ability or trait every single level after 10. And I think this made every level feel that much more meaningful, and you are genuinely excited for your next level. It's fun when you get to choose a new talent or trait. Before, you could go long stretches of time without getting to choose a talent, which could make those stretches of levels feel really slow. And then sometimes the new talents you got were really boring. You know, like a movement ability. It's useful, sure, but it's sort of like getting socks for Christmas. I also just really love going down the trees and plotting what direction I want to go and which talents I want to pick up. I mean, sure, at the end of the day, you will just go to Icy Veins or whatever your go-to resource is for the optimal build. But before all that, isn't it kind of fun to see what you can come up with on your own, and then see how close it is to the optimal build? Anyway, so the best part about this new system is you aren't punished for experimenting or enjoying playing different content with different builds. You are free to change your talents around, and you aren't charged any kind of resource to do so. In fact, the game wants you to change your talents. You are given the option to save multiple loadouts, so you can have one for PvP, PvE, raiding, solo, whatever it is you want to do. So for the next section, let's talk about story and questing. Leveling and questing goes hand in hand, and when it comes to the actual questing, there is quite a lot of variety in World of Warcraft. You know, sometimes a quest will have you going around collecting various items and taking out a bunch of enemies while you do so, while other times you jump onto a raft and go on a wild river ride while trying to catch as many fish as you can. You really never know what to expect. One of the coolest quests is basically going through the multiverse and seeing the war against Deathwing in a world where Murlocs rule. Murloc's next playable allied race? And as for the story, I've really been enjoying the story in Dragonflight. I found the world building to be interesting, and the character development has likewise been really strong. Now, when it comes to the presentation of the story, that's where I feel it's a bit mixed. A lot of the story is told through quest boxes, which I think is a very boring way to present that information. It doesn't help that World of Warcraft has basically been training players to ignore the quest boxes for years. There were also several story beats that were told where characters were just standing around in a very static way. It doesn't exactly grab your attention, and in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if players started to run off as characters give off their dialogue in these moments. Final Fantasy XIV kind of spoiled me in this regard. In that game, you almost always get some sort of cutscene for whatever quest you are doing, and it's not all action set pieces. Sometimes it's just two characters chatting with each other. But the camera will pan from character to character as they speak. They have more animations and emote more, and that really helps with bringing you into the scene. Now, whenever there are cutscenes in Dragonflight, they were done really well. And I'm not saying I want these kind of cutscenes to happen for every quest. That would be a pretty tall order. But something more than just characters standing around. Anyways, with those nitpicks aside, this story does have me invested. I am curious to see where it is going, and I haven't felt that way about WoW's narrative in a very, very long time. So now we're finally getting into the endgame. So Endgame is where many of the most current World of Warcraft expansions really started to unravel for me, with endless constant daily grinds that just really start to chip away at your soul. This time around, there really is nothing like that. Now don't get me wrong, there are plenty of things that you can grind until you're blue in the face, but they have an endpoint, and being able to say you are done is a nice feeling. Now when it comes to the world quest, the way they spawn has been changed, and I think it's for the better. They are now on a 3-day timer. You know, I remember back in Shadowlands feeling pressured to do every single daily quest twice a day, and doing that every day was a really quick way to start hating doing world quest. There's also a lot of variety with the world quest in Dragonflight. You know, of course you have the generic kill X amount of enemy world quest, but there's also world quests that make use of the dragon gliding, where you need to fly through a whole horde of insects, or maybe fly through rings to gather lost packages or drop down flags. And of course, there are the races as well. Dragon gliding is a ton of fun, so I am so happy to see that it's getting utilized quite often. There is also rock climbing, something I never saw coming as a world quest. It's a very simple minigame and pretty easy, but it adds much needed variety. There's also a series of world quests where you ride a raft down the rivers and take pictures of wildlife, very similar to Pokemon Snap. And much like rock climbing, it's a nice break from just killing everything in sight. And now we're going to take a look at the dungeons, another big aspect of Endgame. So dungeons are a thing that get run a lot in Endgame, and I just wanted to start off by saying that I have been enjoying my time with them. I think they are a lot of fun, but I also think they are lacking in some areas. Something that really stuck out to me is that I wasn't really wowed by the dungeons in Dragonflight, and by that I mean the spectacle of them. Nothing made me stop and think, whoa. And after seeing how Final Fantasy XIV handles the majority of its dungeons, they really do bring the spectacle. I can't even tell you how many times a dungeon has just stopped me in my tracks because I was in awe of what was happening. And I'm not saying that World of Warcraft doesn't have dungeons with spectacle, just that nothing in Dragonflight really stuck out. Now, where the dungeons really do shine is the bosses and their mechanics. Many of the bosses employed one of my favorite types of mechanics, that being a bullet hell frenzy, where you need to dodge a variety of ground AoEs, frontal attacks, and of course, projectiles. It really keeps you on your toes, and I can't get enough of it. So another big thing in Endgame is Mythic Plus, which is basically the way that Blizzard keeps dungeons relevant for the entire expansion. Now how it works is you get a key from clearing a regular Mythic, and that key is put into a pedestal at the start of a dungeon. And so now you are basically in a speed run, where your goal is to clear the dungeon before the timer runs out. If you can clear it before the timer runs out, well then your key will go up a level. If you can do it much faster than the timer, well then your key can go up multiple levels. So gotta go fast. Now the reason you'd want a high level key is because the item level of the gear reward is based on the key level. And they scale forever, so at a point, it does become impossible. Right now, according to Raider.io, the record is a Mythic plus 25. The good news is you don't have to get to Mythic plus 25, the gear scaling stops at 20. Anything after that really is just for the challenge of it, and for bragging rights. Another big thing with Mythic Plus are the affixes. Now an affix is a way to keep the dungeons fresh by rotating extra mechanics that you have to deal with in the dungeons. There are 3 that change every single week, and a seasonal affix that stays the same. Anyway, so I think Mythic Plus is pretty fun, and I've met some really awesome players running them. On the other hand, this is also where I've come across some of those, bad experiences. And the thing about those bad experiences is, I think it's entirely because of the way Mythic Plus is designed. Just by having it be timed adds stress. Stress can lead to some unsavory behavior. Also, in my experience, players tend not to stick around if they feel it won't be timed. I've even had some groups literally fall apart right at the last boss because of one wipe. We could have easily cleared the dungeon, but players left because it wouldn't be timed. And if you can't complete your key, well, then your key delevels, adding salt to the wound. And it's not always like players are leaving in anger or frustration either. Sometimes, a player gets disconnected, or they have to leave in the middle of a dungeon due to something completely out of their control. But because you are punished so much for failing, it's easy to see how someone can begin to get salty, especially when your key went down 3 levels in the course of 3 groups because it just keeps happening. Honestly, just getting rid of the forced key de-leveling would make things so much better. Also, I think some of the affix combinations are not very fun, like thundering and quaking together. I thought that was miserable. I also feel like some of the boss mechanics are at complete odds with some of the affixes. For instance, maybe the boss mechanic demands you to stack, and then you have an affix that demands you to spread. It just feels really clunky. And if it's particularly miserable for the weak, no one will want to do that dungeon. Finally, the last thing I'm going to nitpick about is that I feel like some of the dungeon layout decisions become really problematic in Mythic Plus. As an example, environments can sometimes get in your way. I've had tree leaves and spider webs cover 90% of my screen, making it really hard, if not impossible, to see what was going on. Or sometimes you might have a wall that causes your camera to crash zoom so far up your character's butt that it would make a proctologist blush. And there are more than a few instances where the telegraphs for boss mechanics are very similar in color and shade to the floor/environment. And as someone who is colorblind, I am particularly affected by this. And yes, I put colorblind mode on, it really doesn't help. Mythic Plus is a setting where you are being rushed to go through the dungeon, and every mistake will cost you time, and almost every mechanic will one-shot you. And that's why I think these things are problematic, and also add to the stress and frustration of running Mythic Plus. Anyways, even with all those nitpicks and problems I've had, I do still think the dungeons are fun. That stuff doesn't stop me from wanting to run them. I just want them to be their best selves, the most fun that they can be. So raiding is the other big endgame activity. Now, the footage I am using here was taken from looking for raid, because the other raid footage I captured was corrupted. Anyways, I've cleared the raid on normal, and I've done most of the fights on heroic, and you know what, they were really fun. Blizzard really does know how to design engaging and interesting raid encounters, so there really isn't much else to say about that. The trash, I think, is still too much, but the opening of the dungeon where you get to eliminate almost all the trash up to the first boss was a really nice and fun touch. Now, when it comes to gearing, there was a huge change made in how gear drops in Dragonflight raids. Personal loot is out, group loot is back. Now, my problem with group loot is, you can still get loot for classes that aren't in your raid. It feels really bad when multiple bosses drop a weapon or a piece of armor that no one can use. Now, I know this was done to prevent armor class stacking, but, I don't think your average raider is going through that trouble, and furthermore, there had to be a better way to go about it. For example, in Final Fantasy XIV, raids don't drop job-specific gear. Instead, it's all different coffers, like a helmet coffer. And I see no reason why that couldn't work in World of Warcraft. It would prevent loot from being wasted, and wouldn't incentivize armor class stacking. I would also love it if they brought back a raid currency. Something that you could save up from week to week in case you get really unlucky with drops in the raid. And I know that there's the Great Vault, but I don't think that's a great solution. It's just more RNG. With all that being said, I do think the raid is really fun. The only thing that I find mildly annoying is the gearing. I would just like a little bit more agency with it. So to end the video, I will just rapid fire go over some other things in Dragonflight that I just don't have enough to say about to have their own sections. So when it comes to PvP, that is something I've never really enjoyed, but I've talked to a friend of mine who is really into PvP, and he said it's pretty good, fun, and decently balanced. When it comes to the professions, well, they now have their own stats, equipment, and talent trees. And these things, along with the quality of the reagents, actually affect the quality of the crafted item. There are now 5 levels of crafted gear, and your stats and equipment play a huge role in what you get. So these changes added much needed depth to the profession system, and I think it's a huge step in the right direction. Now, the last thing I wanted to touch on is the Great Vault. Now, I alluded to it before, and I hate it. So this is a replacement for the token system, which was a perfectly fine system that worked for years and gave the player more choice and agency in how they wanted to gear their character. And the thing is, I've already been burned by the Great Vault. My second week, there was literally not a single upgrade for me. It made me really miss having a token system. So overall, I think Dragonflight is a really solid expansion so far. Sure, I've had plenty of nitpicks and areas that still frustrate me, but everything else has been so good that I can easily look past it. I'm hoping that they can keep it up. You know, they have released their schedule for the expansion, they got Chris Metzen back, and they have a really solid foundation, so things are looking really good. Anyways, that is all for this one. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you are all having a very happy new year. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, bye!